Howdy friends, I'm Joel Empey, and welcome to another episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL, and on today's episode, we are going to break down top streaming options for the quarterback and defensive positions in fantasy football for Week 12. We are also going to look at the best bets available in Week 12, looking at the lines early here, but on today's episode, we're going to start by looking at the NFC East playoff race, particularly how it's going to go down to the wire between the Cowboys and the Eagles. So when I began researching for this episode, I looked into the NFL playoff race, who is in the hunt, who was in a playoff position right now, and I was trying to figure out what teams are really strongly in the hunt, like could actually I could see realistically overtaking one of the current playoff teams. And really, between all of the AFC and all of the NFC, there's only one outcome that I see likely that a team outside of the playoffs that's in the hunt right now will be able to get inside, and that's the Eagles in their NFC East race against the Cowboys. Now, I'm not saying that the Eagles outright are going to do it. I'm not saying that I even necessarily favor them. I can just absolutely see it in their range of outcomes. Because listen to who the Eagles have left to play this season. They have the easiest schedule in the NFL without a doubt, as in terms of remaining schedule. So the Eagles' remaining schedule this week at home, they're taking on the Seahawks. That's a hard game. I think that the Eagles will lose this game, and it's the only game that the Eagles have left in the season that I think is, very much certainly a loss. It's not a guaranteed loss, but I think that there's a high likelihood of them losing that game. And then they're at Miami, easy win. My Dolphins are terrible, versus the New York Giants. That should be a win for them. That's a game that, if you look at it on paper, they're going to beat the Giants both times and the Redskins both times. On paper, that's how you have to project Eagles, divisional matchups against those two teams going. And then they're at Washington. Like I said, you're going to have to favor them against Washington. Then they're versus Dallas. That's the big one. Obviously, these two teams, Dallas already has a head-to-head win against the Eagles. So that is obviously a must-win, and for both teams, really, because the Eagles have such an easy schedule remaining, and so for the Cowboys, they're going to have to capitalize on that one. And then on the Eagles side, they need to get that one back against the Cowboys, because the Cowboys are going to probably run the table against the rest of the division. So if they're both 5-1 and each have a win over each other, then it'll at least go down multiple tiebreakers if they do have a tied record at the end of the season. And it is worth noting the Cowboys do have a game, not just in head-to-head, but overall record. They have a win over the Eagles at the moment. So after Dallas, they have Week 17 at the Giants. That should be another win. So Seattle, the Giants, Washington, and the Giants again. Those are Miami, the Giants, Washington, and the Giants again. Those are 4 guaranteed wins, basically. That's as much of a guaranteed win as you can get in the NFL. So if they can beat that Dallas game, they can afford to lose to Seattle, and they would still go 5-1 for the remainder of the season. They would finish at a 10-6 record. Even if they lose to Dallas, that would be a 9-7. They would be 4-2 over their last 6 games here. So really, the worst I can see them doing is 4-2. They could potentially go 6-0, but I would say that the best outcome for them would probably be a 5-1. I just don't see them beating Seattle, who's coming off of a bye this week. And then let's look at the Cowboys' remaining schedule. Right now, at New England, that's basically a guaranteed loss. We're calling Seattle basically a guaranteed loss for the Eagles. It's more than fair to call at the Patriots a guaranteed loss for the Cowboys. I mean, they can win. The Patriots haven't looked very good in their last 2 outings. So they can win, just like, the Eagles could beat Seattle. The Eagles are actually favored in that game. We'll get to that in Bets of the Week. Then they're the Cowboys. So they're at New England. Then they're versus Buffalo. That's a toss-up of a game. That could go either way, right? At Chicago, versus the Rams, at Philadelphia versus Washington. So I would say versus Washington, guaranteed victory. So that's one guaranteed victory on the books, I should say, for the Cowboys' remaining schedule. And then let's say I have a feeling, and this is just a feeling, this is a gut feeling, this isn't based on analysis really, so take this or leave this, but the Cowboys who lost to the Jets earlier this year, remember that the Cowboys have the ability to choke spectacularly in games. I feel like they are going to lose one of the two games, either one to the Chicago or one to the Rams. I feel like they're going to lose one of those two games. So I feel like New England's a loss. I feel like they're going to lose one of those two games. Buffalo's like a 50-50 game, and then Philadelphia is like a 50-50 game. So let's just say they beat Washington. They beat one of the two teams between Chicago and the Rams, just to humor my analysis. So that's 2 wins. And then 50-50 game between Buffalo and a 50-50 game between the Eagles. Let's give them a third win. So if they go 3-3 in their remaining schedule, that would be 9-7 overall. So if the worst I see the Eagles doing realistically is 4-2 over the remaining, so 9-7 total. So if they do go 3-3, the Cowboys, and they're 9-7, even if they go 4-2, let's say, but they have a loss to the Eagles and they're 10-6, the Eagles could easily go 5-1, match their 10-6, then they would be tied, head-to-head tied 1-1 each. They would each be 5-1 in their division. So it would go down multiple tiebreakers to decide who would win that division. But ultimately, I think right now, the Cowboys and the Eagles, it's going to come down to that Week 16 matchup, basically. Whoever wins that game, I think, is going to win the NFC East, provided that they don't choke in Week 17 against the Giants if you're the Eagles, or against the Redskins if you're the Cowboys. And whoever wins in Week 16, I believe, will be punching their ticket to the Lombardi sweepstakes in early 2020. So speaking of the Eagles, let's get into the bets of the week for Week 12. And although I was just singing the Eagles' praises, they are 1.5 point favorites this week. Sure, they are at home, but against the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks, who had a bye week last week, so they've had an extra week to rest and prepare for this game. Sure, they are traveling from West Coast to East Coast, but they've had an extra week to acclimatize to that change in their mind. It's not like they just had to play a game on the West Coast yesterday and then they have to go to the East Coast next week. It's they had 2 weeks to prepare for this game. Then also consider Seattle, in their most recent outing, beat the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. San Francisco is considered to be by many the best team in the NFC. At the very least, they're the number 1 seed in the NFC. They only have 1 loss on the entire season. It was that loss to the Seahawks. So, if Seattle just went into enemy territory against what is considered to be the best team in the entire NFC, the number 1 seed in the entire NFC, and they beat that team on their home field, then why wouldn't you feel confident that Seattle would be able to do the same thing to the Philadelphia Eagles this week? I love Seattle as an underdog. I can't believe they're underdogs. I understand that Philadelphia is at home, but Seattle's coming off the bye. That's a huge bonus for them. And I love this. I love Seattle plus 1.5, but I like them even better in the money line because I just think that I definitely think they're going to win this game. I think that's an extremely likely outcome that they get a victory. Russell Wilson playing at his MVP form this year, he's going to find a way to get a victory. No matter, even if it's an ugly way, he's going to find a way to get a victory. So to get the Seahawks as underdog money in a money line bet, that is just amazing. That's probably my favorite bet this week. Another bet that I really like this week is the Giants plus 6.5 at Chicago. And you might think that I'm crazy for wanting to take the Giants at Chicago, but Chicago's defense isn't as good as it used to be. Ever since Akeem Hicks has been out of the lineup, they've allowed a lot more yardage to opposing running backs. As we saw in the game last night, Todd Gurley, who's had a really disappointing season so far, had an exceptional game against the Bears. So the Bears give up running. That's the way to beat the Bears defense. The Giants have Saquon Barkley, one of the best, if not the best, running back in the NFL. Sure, not the best this season, but in overall potential terms, maybe the best running back in the entire NFL. Now, you also might be saying, yeah, but Barkley has been dealing with nagging injuries and whatnot. Remember that Barkley had a high ankle sprain earlier this year, and he was supposed to be out for like 8 weeks, and he was only out for a few weeks after that? He was like running around after 2 weeks. I think he only missed 3, maybe 4 games. It was supposed to be 8 weeks. And the Giants just had their bye week last week. So Barkley, with his Wolverine-like healing ability, having a whole week to rest up and heal up last week, I think that we're going to see a pretty good version of Barkley going into this week against the Bears. And that's just talking about the Bears' defensive side of the ball. The real reason why I think the Giants are going to be able to cover plus 6.5, which is so basically a touchdown, right? The Bears have to win by 7 points to beat the spread here. The reason why I think the Giants are going to cover their end of the spread is that the Bears' offense is abysmal. I don't think the Bears have played a good football game since week 4 when they beat the Vikings 16-6. They haven't played a good game since week 4. That was 8 weeks ago. The Bears' kicking game is a disaster. And, Eddie Pinheiro missed 2 field goals last night that could have changed the entire complexion of the game. And he's missed multiple field goals this year. He did make the one clutch one against Denver. Maybe he's made other clutch ones. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he's missed a lot of kicks this year. And I thought he was going to get fired after missing 2 kicks in primetime last night. The Bears are saying, hey, we're not super confident in the guy, but we're going to stick with them, which is like, that's a horrible thing to say. It's like, hey, bro, to Eddie Pinheiro, hey, bro, we're not confident in you, but we don't feel confident that we're going to be able to find anybody better. So, hopefully you don't stink, is basically what they're saying to him, which is not good for his confidence as a young kicker. And then Mitch Trubisky, he's just terrible. The Bears' offense is just horrendous, stupendously horrendous, I would dare say. The over-under in this game, the total is 40.5 points. So even the odds makers think it's going to be super low scoring, yet they think Chicago's going to win by a touchdown. I just don't see them doing it. It's not that I see the Giants putting up huge numbers. I just see the Bears being so inept that I can't picture them winning by a touchdown. It doesn't matter how bad the Giants' defense is. At this point in time, with the way that Trubisky played last night, the way that Trubisky's been playing recently, even if it's Chase Daniel in there, it's not like I feel more confident in the Bears' chances with Chase Daniel in there. I feel more or less the same. I just don't think the Bears have it in them right now to win a game by a touchdown against probably anybody. Maybe the Redskins. I would say maybe the Redskins, I would favor them by a touchdown. That'd be about it. That's the only team in the NFL right now I would favor the Bears. I would pick the Bears if they're plus 6.5. So I like the Giants in this one. The final game that I really want to bet on this week is the Raiders and the Jets. I like the Raiders -3 at New York Jets. And I understand that this is a West Coast coming to the East Coast, a West Coast team that's from a warm climate, no less, coming to an East Coast team that has a cold climate. So in a lot of ways, there's, those factors alone are pretty difficult to overcome. And then to be favorites on the road, that's generally the home team gets a spotted, a field goal. So this is like a 6-point swing, but I would still even like the Raiders, even if they were -6 right now. Thing about the Raiders this year is that I still think they're an underrated team. Like, they've beaten a lot of decent to pretty good teams this year, and they've only really lost to teams that are good, that are some of the best teams in the league they've lost to. And just they've beaten plenty of teams by more than 3 points, which is what they're favored by against the Jets, who, are not a good team. Here are some teams that are better than the Jets that they've beaten by more than 3 points. The Broncos, they beat by 8. The Colts in Indianapolis by 7. And the Lions by 7. And that wasn't the Colts with Brian Hoyer at quarterback. That was Jacoby Brissett in there. Brissett, who's been having a great year, even better at home. That was at Indianapolis. The Raiders went and won by 7. So why wouldn't you think that they could replicate maybe a similar feat against the Jets, which is a much less talented team than the Colts? I feel like the Raiders just easily cover 3 points in this game. But the bet that I like even more than the Raiders -3 is the over bet on the total points for this game, which is 45.5 points. So 45.5 point total implies 21.25 points for the Jets and 24.25 points for the Raiders, provided that the Raiders are 3-point favorites. Now, the Jets give up 25.5 points per game on average, and the Raiders give up 25 points per game on average. Both these teams have terrible defenses that give up a lot of points, some of the most points in the entire NFL, in fact. Now, the Jets' offense has also been scoring a lot lately. So this isn't just bad defenses. These offenses do have ability to score. And I've already talked about how I think the Raiders are going to outscore the Jets by more than 3 points in this one. So I'll just talk about the Jets a little bit. Sam Darnold and the Jets scored 34 points in back-to-back weeks going into this game. 34 offensive points in back-to-back weeks going into this game. Their offense is pretty hot right now. Darnold's finding Crowder. Ryan Griffin is the Chris Herndon that we wish Chris Herndon was all year. Le'Veon Bell's a weapon, obviously. And then, obviously, if I think that the Raiders are going to beat the Jets by more than 3, and I think that, the Raiders obviously give up 25 points per game. The Jets are only projected to score 21.25, so they're projected to score less than the average of what the Raiders give up. I think they're going to pass the average with how hot the Jets offense is right now. I think they're going to pass that average of 25 points. So that's well ahead of the 21.25 that they're projected to score. And then obviously, since I think the Raiders are going to cover the spread of -3, I obviously think that if I think the Jets are going to break 25-point average that the Raiders give up. So let's say 26 points. I think the Raiders are going to win by at least 4 points. So 30 points. That's a 56 over-under. That's well above the 45.5. Even if this line goes up a little bit, until it gets to closer to 50, I would be hammering this line. This is the bet. This is my second favorite bet of the week. I like Seattle plus 1.5, or Seattle money line is my favorite bet of the week. I just can't believe Seattle's an underdog to the Eagles. I think you have to exploit that. But after that, I think the over in this game, both these offenses are going to be able to score because both these defenses are terrible and the Jets are hot right now on offense. So the over on this game is my second favorite bet of the week. Hammer both those bets. And you can bet all the bets that I said, but absolutely hammer those two. That's like guaranteed money in my mind. Fantasy football quarterback streaming options for week 12. I just went off about this game at the end of my gambling segment. So Jets and Raiders, I like both of these quarterbacks, which is no surprise if you just listened to me rant on the gambling segment. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. Obviously, the Jets scored 34 points in back-to-back games going into this one. Sam Darnold's really hot right now. He's coming off of great performances against the Redskins and the Giants, who actually both give up fewer fantasy points per game than the Raiders. So I think that Darnold at this point, you can play him in plus matchups, and this is clearly a plus matchup. And the game script in this one should benefit the Jets because they're going to have to keep the pedal to the metal to keep up with the Raiders, who should be scoring a lot of points against their terrible defense. So let's look at the other side of the ball. The Jets give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing QBs, and recently made Ryan Fitzpatrick and Daniel Jones look like Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees. So Derek Carr should have a very high ceiling in this one. He is available in much less leagues than Darnold, but I figured while I was mentioning Darnold, I would just mention Carr, even though he's 57% owned. I think either of these guys are good options. I think they're both likely to finish top 12 quarterbacks. I think this is going to be a high-scoring affair, like I said. The more I look at it and think about it, I think that this is going to be a shootout of a game. So I think both these quarterbacks are solid starts this week. If Carr's available, I might favor him over Darnold, but I don't even know about that necessarily. If I were you, I would pick the guy that you think you have a better chance of getting as your higher waiver priority, because both these guys are going to be top 12 fantasy quarterbacks this week in my mind. Now, if your Carr and Darnold options aren't there for you, or you're just not that enthused about going out to get one of those guys, another option this week is Jeff Driscoll. I know, another unsexy option, but when you look at the range of outcomes for this game, I think that he's got a pretty good upside, a good floor, and a high ceiling. In fact, Sam Darnold just scorched the Redskins D, who is the team that Jeff Driscoll is taking on this week. Sam Darnold just scorched them for nearly 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then Driscoll just proved last week, I think he put up like 27 fantasy points against the Cowboys, which is a better defense than the Redskins. The Redskins aren't that bad of a defense, but the point is Driscoll showed that he has an ability to score a meaningful fantasy performance against a decent defense. Now, I also believe that Dwayne Haskins is going to play a terrible game. I think Dwayne Haskins is the number one guy that you should be attacking and focusing on in fantasy football, with defenses and with your quarterback play, because Dwayne Haskins is going to turn the ball over. He's going to give the Lions some short fields, and the Lions are going to have an increased opportunity to score touchdowns this week. Now, with the Lions' inability to run the football and Driscoll's rushing upside that was on display last week against the Cowboys, which is why he has a high floor in my opinion, because of his rushing capabilities. So the Lions can't run the ball very well. Driscoll can run the ball. The Lions are going to have an increased opportunities at touchdowns this game. So I believe that Driscoll is extremely likely to be involved in all or most of those touchdowns for the Lions. So once again, I think that if you're desperate, Driscoll is a great option that you're going to be, I think, very grateful that you put in your lineup. He's going to be available in your league. I can just about guarantee it. And he's got a solid floor because of his rushing, because of the Lions' projected point total in this game. And he has a high ceiling because of the projected point total and because of his rushing upside and his likelihood of being involved in the majority of Lions touchdowns in this one. Now let's look at DST streaming options and let's get the hell out of here. My number one DST streaming option for the week in week 12 is the Falcons versus the Buccaneers. I know you can't throw away the first 8 weeks of the season where the Falcons were just dog shit, to put it lightly. You have to consider in way more heavily the 2 most recent weeks since the Falcons bye week, where they've been incredible on defense and in general, right? So yeah, you can't throw away the whole 8 weeks. You have to understand that one of those terrible outcomes is possible for the Falcons D, but just look at the sample size of the last 2 weeks and look at the teams that they did it against. 2 weeks ago, against the New Orleans Saints, who, by the way, had Drew Brees in the lineup, Alvin Kamara in the lineup, Michael Thomas in the lineup. They had everybody, all the heavy hitters, all the star players. They held the New Orleans Saints to 9 offensive points in the game. The Falcons had 6 sacks and scored 9 fantasy points themselves. And then last week against the Panthers, they had a touchdown on defense, the Falcons did. They had 4 interceptions. They only had 2 in the entire season going into that game, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. for their chances of getting an interception going into this week. They had 5 sacks in that game. So they had 6 sacks against the Saints the week before and then 5 sacks last week. So, they're getting after the quarterback. And they only had 3 points allowed in that game. They scored 23 fantasy points in that game, the Falcons D did. So over the last 2 weeks, they have been outrageously good against better teams. And also, I said the Saints had all their heavy hitters. Not that the Panthers have heavy hitters in the same way, because Kyle Allen isn't anywhere near Drew Brees, and DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel aren't anywhere near Michael Thomas. But Christian McCaffrey is better than Alvin Kamara, and Christian McCaffrey was playing, and he had a productive day, sure, but they couldn't score. He couldn't turn that productivity into points. He turned it into fantasy points for my fantasy team, which was I thank you, Christian. I thank you. So the Bucs. Oh, and both those games were on the road, by the way. That wasn't in the Mercedes-Benz Dome, where the Falcons are so much better. They're so much better at home, traditionally. Now, the Bucs, they give up the 7th most points to fantasy defenses. They have the most interceptions of any team in the NFL this season with 26, and they've given up 41 sacks this year. So, the Falcons, who had 11 sacks in the last 2 games, 6 and 5, the Buccaneers are averaging over 4 sacks a game given up. So there's going to be a high sack total, I'm projecting, for the Falcons, just based off of those numbers alone. And then the sheer number of interceptions that Jameis Winston just throws week in and week out. And then the fact that, the Falcons D had 4 interceptions last week. I don't know if it's a situation where, they used up all their interceptions for the foreseeable future, or if it's a situation where this is going to be a sign of more things to come. I think it's the latter. I think that their defense is getting better, and only 2 interceptions until this past week. There has to be some progression there, I believe, in terms of their interception numbers. So I think that they're going to get a pick. Jameis always throws more than 2 a game, 2.6 interceptions a game. Like, that's insane. Over 2.5 interceptions a game on average. 4.1 sacks a game on average. So I think that they're going to get an interception at least, if not 2, not 2.5, and 4 sacks. That seems reasonable. If the Falcons can get those kinds of numbers and hold the Bucs to a low point total, like they did against the Saints and the Panthers. Saints are a better offense. Panthers are a worse offense than the Bucs. If they can hold the Bucs to a low point total, get those sacks, get some turnovers, they're going to be a top 12 defense this week, and I think that they will hit all of those metrics. Go get the Falcons D this week. Buy into the hype now that they've had 2 big wins. Don't wait on the hype and miss the boat on this week. Now, if you can't get the Falcons because you have poor waiver priority or for whatever reason, and you need a deeper cut defense this week, or you just need a backup defense, you're going to put the Falcons at the top of your waiver priority, but you think somebody might steal them. So you want a reassurance backup defense, a defense that's only owned in 7.5% of leagues on ESPN.com. So I can pretty much guarantee whatever league you're in, this defense is going to be available. That's the Detroit Lions this week. They take on the Washington Redskins. Now, Dwayne Haskins is the guy to attack. I said this when I said Jeff Driscoll as a streaming quarterback, and I'll say it again when I'm saying stream the Lions defense. I think you should be streaming quarterbacks and defenses against the Redskins as much as possible, because I think you need to attack Dwayne Haskins. He's a turnover machine. He's inexperienced. He's young. He plays on a bad team. I think that they're throwing him to the Wolves. The Redskins are. I think they're throwing him to the Wolves right now. They're seeing if he sinks or if he swims. They're just tossing him into the deep end. That's a better metaphor for the sinks or swims part. They're tossing him into the deep end with a heavyweight vest on. That is the heavyweight vest of inexperience, and they're asking him if he can tread water. I don't think he can tread water. I think that the Redskins are setting him up to fail because they want to see if they've got something in him. If not, they're going to Rosen this dude and kick him to the curb and draft a quarterback next year. Haskins is 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions so far on this season. And both of his touchdowns came last week against the abysmal New York Jets. The Lions are going to have a better defense than that. He's going to have a worse game than he did against the Jets, who were able to put up 9 fantasy points against him. Look at his 2 starts this year. Or sorry, they put up 8 fantasy points against him. My bad. His 2 starts this year, Dwayne Haskins, he's played the Bills and the Jets. 9 points scored total for the Redskins against the Bills and 17 points total against the Jets. I think that he's going to score somewhere in the middle of that, since the Lions defense is basically, the Jets are one of the worst defenses. The Bills are one of the best defenses. The Lions are in the middle. So I think that Haskins is going to have a day between where his day was against the Bills and where his day was against the Jets, which you'll take that fantasy performance defensively any day of the week. So in a plus matchup like this, I love the Detroit Lions. You're not going to have a ton of opportunities to play the Lions throughout the year, but I'll play just about anybody against the Redskins. All right, well, that does it for this episode of Joel Empey Talks NFL. I want to thank you so much for watching this video. If you did make it all the way to the end here, you could please like the video. I would really appreciate that. You could subscribe to my channel. I would also appreciate that. And spread my channel around. Try to pump these subscription numbers up. That's really what I'm trying to work on here. Follow me on Twitter at Empey Talks. And comment below anything that you want to know or discuss about Week 12 in the NFL. And until next time, cheers, friends.